Welcome to Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack, a teaching ministry that focuses on God's unconditional love and grace.
There could be millions and millions and millions of people watching this program right now, and every one of you was designed by God with a purpose.
And now, here's Andrew.
Welcome to our Wednesday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing to teach a series that I've entitled How to Find, Follow, and Fulfill God's Will. This was originally 3 separate teachings that I combined into one, and we have this book entitled How to Find, Follow, and Fulfill God's Will. And I tell you, I love this. This is one of the very first things that the Lord ever used in my life. Actually, my spiritual life. I got born again when I was 8, but when I was 18 is when God really started moving in my life, and it was all around how to find God's will. And since then, I've learned how to follow God's will and how to fulfill God's will. And I'm also giving out this little free booklet entitled My Appointment with God, and this is just a little 25-page booklet that I wrote about my encounter with the Lord March the 23rd, 1968. And I tell you, it was awesome. And what God did for me, He'll do for anyone. So I really am excited about this teaching because this is something that the Lord not only used 50-something years ago in my life, but it's something that I refer to constantly. Did you know becoming a living sacrifice, like I was teaching in our first segment on this, Romans chapter 12, verse 1, it's not a one-time decision. That's the reason the Bible calls it a living sacrifice. It has to be a continual thing. So these truths that I've been sharing with you are truths that I live every single day of my life. I don't do it perfectly, but it is my goal and it's what I'm moving towards. I haven't arrived, but I've left. And I tell you, these things have just transformed my life, and I know it would work for you. So this, like I said, is the middle of my 3rd week. I haven't got time to go back and share everything. Please get our materials. You can go to our website. You can get the materials free off the website. They're all archived and you can watch them. But I tell you, this is life-changing. What I've talked about the last few days is how Moses came to the end of himself. When he first had God's will revealed to him, he was self-willed and he thought he could accomplish it through his own strength and power, his position that he had, which was certainly a blessing of God. A person who is destined to be killed at birth not only lived, but wound up being raised in the house of the very person who gave the order to kill him. And he had riches, and he had education, and he had military might, and he had all of these things. It was easy for him to think he was going to accomplish God's will through the position that he had. But no, God wanted to do it a different way, and Moses was so self-willed that he tried to bring God's will to pass in his own strength and power, and it messed everything up. Cost him 40 years in the wilderness, and the children of Israel 30 years extra bondage. And so at the end of those 40 years in the wilderness, God appears unto him in a burning bush and speaks to him, tells him he's going to go back and bring the Israelites out. And he says, God, I can't do it. 4 or 5 different times, God, I can't do it. They won't believe me. It won't work. He had all of this self-righteousness, self-confidence knocked out of him after 40 years in the wilderness. Now he had no position in the Egyptian government. He wasn't over the military. He had lost everything. He had been shamed. He was a nobody. And you know what? That's exactly the kind of people God's looking for. If you are nothing, you qualify. You know, I referred to this passage on one of my programs a few days ago, but let me just turn over and read it because I'm not sure I quoted exactly right. But here in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26, it says, For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. Boy, that's exactly opposite the way we would do it. You know, if you were God and if you wanted somebody to represent you, if you put a sign out, help wanted, man, most of us would expect God would want the cream of the crop. The person that is the most educated, the most wise, the most noble, the most mighty. Those are the people that God would go for. But it says that's not the way God does it. And in the next verse it says, but God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And base things of the world and things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in His presence. Really, if you look at things from God's standpoint, who is qualified to represent God? Nobody. Nobody's in God's class. That may pop some of y'all's bubble that you think you are just really awesome, but the truth is, when it comes to representing God, none of us, there is nothing that we can do in our own ability that would really represent God to people properly. And so from God's standpoint, God's never had anybody qualified working for Him yet. And so rather than taking the wise and the mighty and the noble, He chooses the rejects and then infuses them with His power. And when miracles start coming through them and wisdom comes out of their mouth that they didn't learn, it's not their great wisdom, people recognize, man, this must be God flowing through this person. See, that's the way that God looks at things. God chooses the weak things. And as long as Moses was carried away with his own ability, that was a hindrance to God using him. So Moses spent 40 years in Bush University learning that God, it's got to be you. I can't do it on my own. God gave him a final exam, said, throw that stick that you have in your hand down. It turned into a snake. He fled from before it. God stopped him and said, come back and pick it up by the tail. To pick up a snake by the tail means that you're no longer in control. And Moses, as far as he knew, this snake was going to turn and bite him. It could have been the end of his life. But he was going to do what God told him, even if it cost him his life. Until you reach that place, you aren't usable. That's a huge statement. I can hear people gasping all over the world right now, thinking, oh man, if that's what it takes, how am I ever going to get there? You can get to a place to where you know that God is a good God and that God's plans for you are better than your plans for yourself. And you can get to where you trust Him and you will do whatever He tells you, regardless of whether it looks like it's going to be to your advantage or not. You can't reach that place. Again, I'm not saying that I've arrived, but I've left. I'm moving in that direction. And to the degree that I have laid my life down and followed what God has told me to do, I have been blessed, blessed, blessed. When you give to God and lay your life down, God will give to you. You can't outgive God. You'll never surrender more to God than what He will repay you. He will repay you 100-fold in this life and in eternity, everlasting life. But I tell you, the best way to run your life is to run up a white flag and surrender and say, God, I can't do it. I want you to control me. So this is where Moses had to come to, and that's what's recorded in Exodus chapter 3 and chapter 4. And after Moses submitted to God, threw his rod down, it turned into a snake, and then he took it by the tail, it turned back into a rod. To other people, it might have looked like it was just Moses' rod, the same as it was before. But no, now in Exodus chapter 4, verse 20, it says, and Moses took his wife and his sons and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. I know I mentioned this on yesterday's program, but this is just one of the most important things that God has ever shown me. That when you lay your life down, and then God will tell you to pick it back up, but He'll tell you to pick it up by the tail. You aren't in control anymore. God's in control. You're going to run your life based on what God tells you. When you do that, it doesn't become your life anymore. It's God's life living through you. The Apostle Paul said in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me. Paul said that the life he had, it wasn't his life, it was God living through him. Paul had done exactly what Moses did. Maybe not in the same way with a rod, but he had thrown his life down. He had laid his life down. And he gave it 100% to God. And because of it, God gave it back to him. Other people, it looked like Paul was making these decisions, but he wasn't making them independent of God. He was being directed by God. Because of it, he had his life by the tail. He wasn't in control, and he had power flowing out of him. And that's the way it is with you and with me. If you want God's power to flow through you, you've got to come to the end of yourself before you start seeing the beginning of God flowing in your life. And I'm telling you, there's people watching this program all over the world right now that what I'm describing right here is the very reason that things aren't working out. And with Moses, he knew God's will for his life. Over in Acts chapter 7, it says that when he killed that Egyptian, 40 years before these things that we're recording, he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. Moses knew God's will for his life, and he was trying to accomplish God's will. But not everything that's good is God. It was God's will, and he just supposed that all of the good things that had happened to preserve him were the way God was going to do it. But no, God had a different plan. And so you've got to not only find out what God's will is, but you've got to learn how to follow God to bring that will to pass. You need to let God be the one that controls you. In my life, I could give you hundreds of examples of this. But you know, when I started out, I just felt like the Lord impressed me to give all of our materials away. And this is back when we were poor. We could have used the money from the sale of these things. You know, I'm not going to tell you who this is, but there's a very famous person that if I was to tell you who they were, you would know them, or at least their relatives who are known worldwide. And they came to me after, 10 years of me giving everything away. And they came and said, "Thus saith the Lord, you need to quit giving everything away and you need to start selling it." And they started telling me how much money I could make off of selling all of our materials. And you know what? I respect this person. I'm not against them, but that's not what God told me. And so I just kept giving our things away. We have given away, I don't even know, we quit counting at over 100 million books, CDs, DVDs that we've given away. And that's not even including our website. Our website, people can go there and I think it's 95, 96% of everything that's on our website is available for just a gift of whatever. We have over 200,000 hours of free material on our website. And I'm not counting that when I'm talking about giving things away. I'm talking about physical products like this, that we give things away. We will tell people that, it's available for a gift of any amount. What that means to me is that I'm giving this to you, but people will say, "Well, what do you need?" And so we say, "Here's a suggested donation," and some people give. But in my way of thinking, I gave it away. I'm just telling you, here's what we would like to see come in. And over 50% of the people that contact us don't give a thing. And we send it to them anyway. So anyway, I brought all that up to say that this is something that God spoke to me. And in the natural, it looks completely contrary to any wisdom that anybody else would have. Since I've done that, I've been doing this now for over 50 years. And in the last few years, I've met a couple of other people who also give their material away. But at the time I was doing it, I didn't know another person on the planet that just told people to give whatever you wanted. I was on radio at that time, and we gave away tens of thousands of things. And in the natural, it looks terrible. But did you know that I think it's one of the things that God has used to make our ministry go everywhere? Not too long ago, I got a letter from a man who is on the South Pole, Antarctica, on a military expedition. And he went there and just got, they get socked in for 6 months at a time. And out of boredom, he just started looking to see if anybody had left anything there. And there was an entire library of my teachings on the South Pole. And this guy, out of boredom, got to listening to those things and got born again. Did you know that wouldn't have happened if I'd have sold that library for like $5,000? Nobody would have left that there. But because they were all free, somebody that was on an expedition there just left all of these teaching, and people got born again at the South Pole. In hindsight, I look back and I really believe that our free tape ministry is one of the smartest things I ever did. And yet it wasn't my idea. It was what God put in my heart. And God just led me to do it. And now we have people that get my material and they like other ministers, but mine is free. And so they'll take mine over somebody else's, and it's just allowed us to spread these materials everywhere. I'm telling you, if you will just make this decision and throw your life down and then pick it up by the tail and say, God, whatever you tell me, God will lead you to do things that may be contrary to the way you think, but it'll work out for good every single time. God will make you look smart. You know, like I was saying, we started this ministry and had nothing, and we gave everything away. It makes no sense whatsoever in the natural. But from God's perspective, it's great, because, you know, it's like seeds. Every time I'm teaching, not only my television programs, but a book, a CD, a DVD, it's like seeds that I'm sowing. And those things just grow and spring up. You know, the very first woman I ever hired to run our ministry back in Lamar, Colorado, she was a businesswoman and owned 3 businesses, and she just thought I was absolutely crazy for giving my things away. And she constantly was trying to talk me into, you need to sell these materials. Don't give these people any of these materials if they don't send in money for it. And I just kept saying, no, that's not what I'm going to do. And it really bothered her. And one day she was out jogging, and she was running along this road, and there were dandelion seeds everywhere. The road was nearly completely covered with dandelion seeds. And when she saw that, she thought, that's just like Andrew's teaching. I know for a fact, I had people write me, and we would send thousands and thousands of cassette tapes into prisons. And people wrote me and said, these prisoners are getting these things for free, and then they're recording all of their music over them and stuff, and they're just wasting them. So I know that those things happen. And anyway, this woman, when she was jogging and saw all of these dandelion seeds on the road, she says, these are just like Andrew's teaching, and they're just being wasted on this. You know, it's like these seeds that are falling on the road. It's not doing any good at all. But when she said that, the Lord said, now lift up your eyes. And she looked out on this field, and I mean, as far as you could see, there was dandelions. And the Lord spoke to her and He says, yes, there is waste. Yes, there are people that abuse it, but dandelions are everywhere. And she came in and told me that, and she says, now I see. And she supported me from then on about giving away all of our materials. And because of it, I can tell you that there are people that we've reached that other ministries haven't reached just because I made those things free. God will tell you to do things that are counterintuitive. It goes against what the world has to say, but if you will give your life to God and follow His leading, it will have supernatural power in it. I can bear witness that I really believe God's leading in my life has just changed everything. When we started building our Charis campus, God told me to do everything debt-free. And we've now built over $120 million worth of buildings and property and land infrastructure. In 9 years, we built $120 million worth of things with only, right now we have about $6 million of indebtedness. And I'm getting out of that quickly in the name of Jesus. And I'm telling you, it's working. When God tells you to do something, it will work. But you have to be willing to literally lay your life down. This goes back to what I was teaching the very first week about being a living sacrifice. A sacrifice isn't in control. A sacrifice is totally at the mercy of the one who is running the sacrifice. You should be in a position to where it's not, God, here's what I want to do. Will you bless this? And not try and pray and get God to bless what you're doing, but instead just say, God, what do you want done? You know, we recently had a business summit here, and we had in John Maxwell and some really powerful speakers, and I'm not against anything they said. I really was blessed by it. But there were so many things about, you need to set goals. You need to discipline yourself. You need to do this. It was all about being self-motivated. And I have goals, but I only really have one goal, and that's to know God. That's my goal. That's it. I just want to know God more. And my only ambition is to do whatever God tells me to do. Now, God has told me to start a Bible college, and has told me that I need to build housing and different things for our students. And so because I've got directions from God, I guess you could say I've got goals. But really, they aren't my goals. They're things that God told me to do. I don't have any goal outside of knowing the Lord and just following the Lord. That's it. And when you live your life that way, I could literally, if God was to tell me to pick up and move to Africa, I would do it in a heartbeat, and I'd turn everything over to somebody else. And I know there's people that think, oh, that's not true, you'd never do that. But I would do it. I've done it in the past. I've given up things to where it looked like we were finally succeeding, and I left it all to go to a place and do things that looked like total death and destruction, not only to me, but to whatever goals or ministry I ever had. I've already done it. I'd do it again. And when you live your life that way, that's when the supernatural power of God flows through you. But when you are the one who's running your life and you're leaning unto your own understanding, that's the biggest hindrance to following God that there is. And that's what Moses had to learn. Moses had to come to the end of himself, and he did. And he threw his life down before God, picked it up by the tail, and to other people it might have looked like it was just the same stick that Moses had before, but now it was the rod of God, and it had supernatural power. When you lay your life down, and I mean, you do it intentionally, you do it in conjunction with being led by the Spirit, not just responding only to this program, but I mean, you're doing business with God. And if you mean that from your heart and lay your life down, I guarantee you, when you pick it back up and you start making decisions at the instructions of the Lord, you will have supernatural power flowing through you. Another example of this is the 5th chapter of the book of Luke, where the disciples fished all night long and caught nothing. But then, after the Lord taught, He told them to launch out into the deep, cast down their nets again. They said, we've fished all night long and didn't catch anything. Nevertheless, at your word, we will do it. And they cast the net down, and this time there were so many fish. Every fish in the Sea of Galilee tried to get in their net. And it broke their nets. They filled 2 boats. The boats began to sink. They did the same thing, but they did it at the command of God instead of at their own wisdom. God may lead you to do some of the same things, but if you will make this decision where you lay your life down and become a living sacrifice, then the supernatural power of God will flow through you, and you'll get different results.